morning, everybody. We're actually starting 4 whole minutes early, which means that you get an extra 4 whole minutes to be part of this conversation. I am Muchaneta to Napel, and what do? I do so much. I don't even know if I should even start that story. I started translating technology in a fashion voice alongside Fredrik. And as part of the creative industry, they're really trying to get the creative industry involved in climate change. So today, I'm super excited to have Fredrik Timour on the chair next to me. You don't understand, guys, how long it took me to get this man in this chair. And I tried quite a bit. And the reason why I tried so hard to get him to come to Munich Fabric Stock, because he has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to how the industry can move forward. Also, he has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to collaborations and partnerships. So I am super happy that you are here. So thank you so much for gracing the Key House stage. And if you don't mind, for those who don't know who he is, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Fredrik Timour, just as you said, and I'm the CEO and founder of something called Fashion Innovation Center, where we're working with the transformation of the fashion business. Very hands-on. We work in academia, we work with policy and politics, but foremost we work directly with brands and other industries that can transform the industry. Everything from logistics solutions to electronics and digitalization. Before that, I actually started a fashion tech company where we created very advanced tech and other stuff for the fashion industry.
So today we're going to cover a lot of ground because I feel like I said earlier, you're like a wealth of knowledge. So let's begin. I want to first start about fashion tech, which is something that's how we met, really, because I was writing about fashion tech and you had a fashion tech company. So can you talk a little bit about how the fashion industry was reacting to technology at this time? Because I feel like we have slowly changed and got better. But in the beginning, they were a bit resistant, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I've created a fashion tech company that created microelectronics for clothes 10 years ago, and that was a little bit early, to say the least, and the industry was not ready. But I think the biggest problem we didn't think that the fashion industry would have innovation and R&D. We were quite clear with that. But what we thought that the fashion industry would have and would be able to do was to be creative and think about ideas and come up with ideas. And that was the biggest shock when I started my fashion tech company. It was like, oh, there isn't a creativity there. They can't think in those terms. Because we expected that to happen. So that was the biggest shock for us, that they didn't do microelectronics and all of that, and that was a little bit alien. We were quite fine with that, and we thought that was the case.
I mean, fashion is innovative on its own terms, really. As opposed to, I guess you'd expect them to really jump on the idea of technology and innovation and be super excited about it. Oh my God, we're getting to innovate. But they're not. They're kind of like a weird combination of being innovative, but yet traditional at the same time.
I think it's a hyper-traditional industry. I mean, basically, if you look at it, I think it's one of the most preserved industries. It's almost like archaeology, because if you look at it, it's from the 1700s and forward, they actually have the same business model. They invented or started the Industrial Revolution, which is great, and they came up with the idea of 4 seasons to sell even more clothes, and then they stuck to that. I mean, if you look at all other industries, from 1700s and forward, they changed a little bit more than the fashion industry. I think it's a very conservative industry.
It is, and you wouldn't think it, right? And you mentioned business models, and you and I have sat down and talked about this idea of new business models for the fashion industry. In order for them to be able to move forward, we need to stop applying new ways into an old machine. Have you got any ideas that you would like to share when it comes to business models? What kind of business models do you see needing to be pushed forward when it comes to the fashion industry?
No, I mean, the obvious ones are subscription models, done correctly. Rental, I tried not to use the word rental because it's bad. And I usually take the example, if Spotify would have said that they were renting music, people might not have jumped onto Spotify. It's good to use other words and talk about it in other terms. But I definitely believe in that rental or subscription services is a quite smart model as well, because you can link it to digitalization, you can link it to trends, you can be much faster, and you can work with pool of clothing curators and much more fun. I would say you can be more trendy because you can fit your business model more to today and reality and young people today that want quick, fast changes, and also selling piece by piece versus selling looks. Because if you have a rental model, you don't have to think in piece by piece anymore. I mean, it's the same cost if you have a monthly cost, so you can think in looks instead, which I think is much more fashion and much more creative in many ways. So.
How many of you, if there was a Spotify for fashion brands, how many of you would subscribe? Just, is it because it's rental? People don't like to rent clothes? No? But imagine it'd be an amazing wardrobe. I mean, I would definitely subscribe. I'm not much of a rental person, but the idea of being able to pick and choose, and you know what, it will make me braver to try different looks because I'm paying a monthly fee, so I'm not thinking too much about, oh, I need to always wear black. I can try that bright orange dress with the big buttons because I'm renting it and I can always give it back.
That, I think, is the biggest thing with rentals, and that you can see. You've seen it actually in Spotify and Netflix, is that when you switch from a paid per piece model to a subscription service, indie stuff in general, or weird stuff, are the things that benefits from that. So indie music in Spotify, for example, rose to the charts. And the reason is when you went and bought a CD and had to pay, I think it was 20 euros in the end or something, you bought something safe, you know. But when you didn't have to pay per song, then suddenly you dared to listen to other stuff. So the indie part or the more creative parts is really benefiting from different business models and creativity.
Which I think really works into the fact that fashion is all about representing how you feel, your kind of like, you know, identity and so forth, and that kind of falls in line with that. Talking about business models, you also mentioned when you were in Brussels at the EU Parliament, you talked a lot about overproduction, which I think is a conversation that has been gaining momentum in the last 12 months. Would you like to share some thoughts on that and kind of where you stand on that?
Yeah, I think it's just setting the narrative correctly, because I mean, if we have an industry with 30 to 40% overproduction, and then we talk a lot about that we need new material, I think the narrative and the order of how to address the problems is a little bit incorrect, because 30 to 40% overproduction is quite extreme. No other industries have anything similar to that. Just imagine if the car industry produced 30 to 40% extra cars that they just threw away. That wouldn't work, and it's bad business. So, and if those numbers that are thrown out is correct, that the fashion industry, the textile industry is 10% of the global CO2 emission in the world, then that means that 3 to 4% of the global CO2 emission is overproduction. So I think that's what we need to address first. And addressing the overproduction, that's not rocket science. That's prediction models, better manufacturing, better logistics. That's very addressable.
So basically what you're saying, instead of all of us worrying about investing in new materials, you know, doing all these kind of new types of innovations, we need to first fix the problem, which is overproduction.
Yeah, I'm saying that take it in the right order. I mean, new materials is super important, but we have a systematic error in the whole industry if we have 30 to 40% overproduction, and that needs to be addressed first. Then we can move on to better materials and all of that. But better materials, I would say, is more to cover up the current business model. Because if you are in the current business model and current value chains, and a lot of big brands have invested too much, and they actually admit, when I sit down with them without mentioning any names, but that they invested too much in the current value chain, so they can't change. They can't change.
Which is quite interesting, because if someone's invested a lot in something, it's hard for them to change because they've put a lot of money into it. So it makes me wonder, with the new legislations coming into play, because I know you work a lot as well with the EU, they're going to be forced to change anyway. So where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, I mean, as I see it, from my perspective, the fashion industry is very, very similar to the music industry at the moment. So you have people or users or consumers, as the fashion industry calls them, that screams for something else. I mean, it's very obvious, but they don't know what they want. I mean, they often don't know that they want an iPhone or an iPad or whatever. You don't know what you want, but you want something else. And that was the exact same thing with the music industry. But the music industry wanted to produce CD records because that was good for them. And then a startup came from Stockholm, Spotify, and introduced a streaming service, and suddenly the whole music industry was changed. And that's a little bit, it's oversimplified, but approximately. But still, I think that that's where the fashion industry is today. It's just in that gap where you have consumers and users that screams for something else, and we really in that disruptive moment where any new players could enter very easily, actually, if you look at it. If you're digitized, if you have users, if you have credit cards on those users, and you have content to produce clothes on top of that, I'm talking about Netflix, I'm talking about Spotify. To enter the fashion market is relatively simple. And I would say that the brand value of the brands today is also not as strong due to the fact how they acted and they had fixed stars and all of that. So even the branding of TV series could be stronger than the branding of brands.
Do you think as well, like the fashion industry needs someone to come in and flip the script? Like you said, with Spotify, it really changed how the music industry does business. Do you foresee something like that happening in the fashion industry? Like someone needs to come in and really shake it up and change it, so then the whole industry would then follow?
I think that would happen, yes. And the reason is the smaller and more agile brand, it's actually easier for them to survive right now. And especially, like you said, if you look at the EU legislation timeline, just the next 4 years, with digital product passport, right to repair, waste framework directives, taxonomy, it's quite complicated for a brand if they don't change completely. You need to set up a digital infrastructure. There's a lot of things that needs to be done from a brand perspective to be able to even sell in Europe. But for smaller brands, it's actually a little bit easier to change than for a big brand. And for completely new players, it's also quite easy. So that's the reason why I think that is a perfect opportunity for new brands and for collaborations. Collaboration with other industries, gaming industry, entertainment industry. It's a perfect opportunity because this is happening.
How many of you, just out of curiosity, know about any of the regulations that are coming into play? Wow, it's definitely going to be a bloodbath, guys. You know, because we always talk about this because it's super important to educate, and I feel a little afraid that if many people don't know about it, and then they come into play, what then? Any thoughts?
When they come into play, what then?
Let's say if one of them comes in 2024, there's another 2025, I think the one is 2026. If people are not educated about it, and how are they going to comply? I feel like how can we ensure that the industry is ready to comply to the new legislation? Do you think it's through collaborations, education? Should the EU play a really key role in ensuring that people and companies are informed beforehand? I feel like there's a lot of work to be done, and there's not a lot of time to do it in.
No, I agree. But it's quite hard. I can understand the brands at the same time. It's quite hard to understand. But we made a pre-study because I think a lot of brands that we meet kind of ignores it. They don't think that it will affect them. So we did a pre-study together with EY or Ernst & Young, where we just looked at CBAM, or the Climate Border Adjustment Mechanism, very sexy name, which basically means that you have to pay a CO2 border tax to ship in stuff into Europe. And the cost for the brands that we were looking at, it's a 5 billion euro brand globally, and I think it's about 1 billion euro in Europe. The cost for just CBAM was 77 million euros, just the fee, the import fees, just for CBAM itself. So you can't produce the same way that you've done before, and you have to change because these are real laws and it's real money. But I think that's what we needed to show was look, this will cost you this much. It's impossible to get around. This is a regulation.
So how are you helping companies? I know the Fashion Innovation Center, they have a nickname called the Switchboard, which I kind of really like. And it's all about connecting companies, educators, people who work within the EU all together. So how are you or your team looking to help people in terms of, I guess, changing, innovating? I know you do a lot with collaborating. We just worked on a project recently with Ninjas in Pajamas. What kind of advice are you giving companies within the fashion industry when it comes to collaborating and partnering up to ensure that they're moving with the times?
Most of the time, we're actually not working that much with the fashion industry, which is weird.
Hard loss.
We're working with companies that sits with solutions. So, for example, we could look into the tech industry, and we saw that they have a really good logistics system. And just with that logistics system itself, we could prove that we could probably lower the overproduction with up to 20% by just implementing a logistics systems and prediction models that were already in place in the tech industry. So then we teamed up and started working with big hardware manufacturers because they sit with solutions. We're working with Ericsson, telecom provider, because we need tracking and traceability. It's more about just moving over. Like I said, it's a little bit like archaeology going into the fashion industry. Going back to the 1800s, they're still running everything in steam. And when you talk about electricity, they're like, what? What is that?
That analogy. So you were also saying about cross-industry collaborations.
Yeah.
A lot of the solutions already exist, but how can we apply them to the industry?
Exactly.
You know, so how have you got any examples where solutions that already exist that we can maybe apply to the fashion industry?
But just being able to tell where you ship the stuff, what was sold, and where they were sold could reduce the overproduction quite a lot. And this should be in the fashion industry. 30 years ago, they should have had it. This is not rocket science. It's just weird. The more we're digging into and the deeper we're digging into big companies, the more confused we get sometimes about the lack of infrastructure, the lack of tools, the lack of really big brands. That's why we always said before everything happened with H&M that maybe they are not better than anyone else, because a lot of people, since I'm Swedish, said like, oh, but H&M is a little bit better. And we were like, we don't think so. They're all about the same. Not better, not worse. They're just as bad as everybody else.
I read that for fashion brands, which are the big companies, it costs them less to throw away unused clothes than it does to change how they do business.
Yeah, and that's really weird. And you were referring to Brussels, so we had an anti-forced labor event at the Parliament. And if you look at it, it's very strange to see an industry that sits with 30 to 40% overproduction. The only way that could possibly happen is if you have forced labor. You can't produce 30 to 40% overproduction and still have a profit. That's not possible, not in a manufacturing industry. So it's another part of the problem, is that it's one of the biggest forced labor industries in the world as well.
That's actually an interesting point. So I was just doing the maths when you were saying what you were saying, like, okay, 30 to 40%. Okay, how do they still have a really big profit? It must be really, human rights must be violated in this space in order for that to happen. Changing the subject. Yesterday you gave a very exciting workshop. I see some of the attendees in the audience. Hello. And you were introducing them to the open connector. And for those who didn't attend, he ran a really good workshop, and it was all about introducing them to a device that they themselves actually programmed. It sounds very technical, but it's quite simple, right, what they did. Could you explain to those who are not able to attend what the workshop was about and what the open connector is as well?
Yeah, we went through actually a little bit what we went through now. So we just general, we talked about what solutions are out there and how can you tackle the problems. But the Open Connector is an initiative by Fashion Innovation Center and EY, Ernst & Young, which is a data sharing platform. So we're trying to collect all of those services under one platform. So waste handling, repair services, all of this that is coming as regulations, we're trying to collect under one platform. So it's a little bit like an app store for sustainability for the fashion industry. We try to make it as simple as possible for a fashion brand to connect to one platform, and the Open Connector itself is a data sharing between the providers. So if you have a logistic provider and then a retail, I can't find the English word right now, but you got retail data, and you got an AI, and you got waste handling. All of that needs data sharing. So you need, for the waste handler, for example, if we need sorting stations, they need to get material information, so we need data sharing between material databases and the garment and the waste handler, etc. So it's a data sharing platform. I think that's the simplest. And we're building consortium around collaboration. So we collaborate with partners to set up an as simple as possible system. And then we use ID for the garments as well. So we add an ID.
So for someone who is not familiar with the technology, how does it work? Do they scan it? How do they get the information that you're providing?
Yeah, I mean, you can use any ID, basically, but we are developed just so that the fashion industry can have something. We developed NFC tags, very small NFC tags, so you can scan it with your phone. And it was quite important for us to, as a starting point, to have NFC so that you can have consumers and users scan the garment with their own telephone. So it's not too industrial, but you can actually have user interactions and memories and everything else, the user experience of the garment, where you can add value on top of the garment itself with digital layers.
And the device is absolutely tiny, isn't it? I mean, it's like literally like the size of a button, which is important for people, because I think a lot of the old kind of like wearable tech or type of devices are always massive and kind of unsightly. But the one you've come up with is super, super tiny and can be quite, I guess, invisible to a way.
It
Not
needed
so
to
obvious.
be small, and it needed to be super cheap. And it needed to be very easy to put into clothes without any reskilling of workers. So that was the challenge. The technology is super simple itself. The challenge was to find a form factor and price and reach a price point. I mean, to get the price point down.
So if somebody wanted to know more about the Open Connector or want to work with you and partner up with you, what advice would you give them in terms of connecting with Fashion Innovation Center?
Yeah, contact us. I mean, we have fashioninnovation.center is the web address, and it's very easy to contact us. And what we do often is that we go in and have workshops, look at a branding strategy in general, like how can you become, what's the roadmap for becoming sustainable? Where's the starting point? And the starting point is often linked to direct CO2 emission reduction. Like I said, reducing overproduction, for example, is an equal sign with CO2 emission. But it's also money. I mean, if you have 30 to 40% overproduction, that's a lot of money bound up in those 30 to 40% that you're throwing away. So we're always trying to look at it from a business model and business perspective as well. You can't be sustainable and not make money. Not in the real world. Unfortunately, I mean, you can tell brands to produce less, but they won't. You need to figure out a way to make a sustainable business as well.
When you were at COP27, you mentioned something that stuck with me when you said people need to realize that sustainability can actually make you money. I think a lot of people in the fashion industry find it as something that is expensive, we can't afford it, and whenever they do create a collection, it's always like a little collection, it's always really overpriced. So if the fashion industry was to understand that sustainability can, in the long run, make them money, I mean, can you explain to them why it can make them money, just so they can better understand why they need to commit more to being more sustainable? Because right now it costs them. As far as they're concerned, it costs them money, so why would I do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is two ways. I mean, first of all, the industry is in a very disruptive moment, so things will happen. It's very similar to, like I said, the music industry, other industries. You can see that peak happening. But that's also one of the biggest business opportunities, because it's one of the biggest industries in the world. And this is one of the biggest business opportunities ever, this change that's happening in the fashion industry. And if you look at it, I mean, you have cost savings, like I talked about, with just introducing better systems, like logistics systems, etc. That's cost savings. But then if you look at the digital layers that we need to add on clothes anyway, we need digital IDs, we need to be able to scan our garments just to comply with EU, with digital product passport, etc. But if you add collaborations with gaming companies, there are completely new revenue streams on top of the clothes, which we've already seen is an enormous potential for revenues. And it could be simple things like, I mean, if you have memories in your garment and you sell it online and you need to pay for it to unlock it, and suddenly the brand gets something, a couple of dollars back from a second-hand sales to unlock information about the garment, for example. There's several business models and recurring revenue on top of the garments, because the fashion industry is so fixed. All other industries looking into recurring revenues, right? I mean, Apple, doesn't matter which company, everybody, the car industry, everybody's looking into recurring revenues. How can we sell more and have recurring revenues? But not the fashion industry. They're selling a garment, and that garment is sold. But once we have a digitalization layer, we can have these recurring revenues. That will also prolong the life length of the garment itself.
You mentioned gaming. I mean, how many of you have ever heard about gaming and fashion as a collaboration? 3 people. Yeah, okay, that's good. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit about how the gaming industry can actually work with the fashion industry? Because I think to some people it might not make much sense. But I know it's something that's happening quite a lot. And we've seen a lot of luxury brands dipping their toe in this space. So can you, I know you worked with Ninjas in Pajamas, can you elaborate a little bit about how that can actually be something that the fashion industry can invest in and another revenue stream for them?
I mean, I think one should think about the gaming industry as an industry that is really, really good at content production and gamification for obvious reasons. But they're really, really good at that. And if you look at the way how much the gaming industry is growing per year, it's one of the fastest growing industries. It's bigger than the film, TV, movie, and music industry together. It's a very, it's a growing industry. And if you think about it not as a gaming industry, but a content provider and gamification provider, then it might make more sense. Because that's something that the fashion industry is quite bad at, creating content in general. And especially digital content that we need, because people are online, people are... and if just an example, if you want to have sorting stations out there that we need, how do we get people to go to the sorting stations? How do we gamify the whole experience of going to a sorting station? That's for an example where the gaming industry is really good. But then if you look at these extra revenue streams, coming up with gamifications of your whole brand experience together with a gaming company. It doesn't need to be games as a traditional games. You can just use what the gaming industry is really good at, creating the content itself and the gamification aspects of it.
When you say gaming, I've got like Mario Bros. And I'm old school, so it's to get my head around that. That's kind of what automatically comes into my head. And someone says, "Oh, gaming and fashion," I'm like, "Oh, Mario," But you kind of mean it from a different way. Are you talking about skins in that respect of like creating collections for your avatar or your digital twin, or?
No, we're more focused on the actual physical part of it. I mean, there is a digital part, of course, but it could be something simple as a city experience. So you hook up and you start working with all the bars and everything in the city, and then you create a whole city experience out of the garments. So if you have the right garment, suddenly your phone starts playing like, hey, you got this, go into this bar and do this, and you start to get a guided tour, or even like a gamification of the new city you're visiting. This is simple ideas, and this is what we're looking into. Like, how can you extend the brand experience? If you want to guide your users, not consumers, but users, you can let them come into your brand experience, and you actually...
See, I think that when we think of gamification, we're really focusing on the consumer. But I think it'd be a brilliant idea, and tell me, guys, if I'm wrong, if we could do that for the industry. Like, if you want to understand sustainability, you want to understand policy, we kind of make it fun for them so they get it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I think one of the problems is languages. Like, we all speak such different languages that we're not able to communicate or listen in a way that can bring change. Have you found this to be a problem? Because I know you work with various industries. Have you found that the language used in different sectors has caused problems in terms of collaborations and partnering up?
That's a very good question. Yes, that's what we call ourselves a switchboard. So, especially if you're talking about academia, policy and politics, and industry, just a simple things like micro factories. When we are in Brussels, we need to talk about micro factories, like small factories that we need to have in Europe. When we talk to the industry, they hate the word micro factories. We need to call it on-demand production. Same thing, different words. But if you don't use the right word, no one understands you and become very like, what do you mean with on-demand production? We want micro factories in Brussels. So there's a constant translation between all of these sectors. And also I think it's sometimes a lack of understanding between them because they live a little bit in their own bubbles, but they have a realization of how the world is that doesn't really conform to the rest of the world. Especially Brussels is like it's Brussels bubble. They really live in their own bubble.
There's all these collaborations that can bring change, but it feels like it's not happening. So I think that's what you once told me about this need to work with, say, the washing machine factory, people that produce washing machines. Why are we not working with them in order to solve this problem?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration in general is the only way forward, but it also needs to be cross-brand. A lot of things needs to be cross-brand. Waste handling, for example. We can't have a waste handling system in Europe that's different for each brand. It would be like if we have PET bottles that we need to go back with, and it was like Coca-Cola per se and Fanta per se. It doesn't work. So there's a lot of cross-brand solutions that needed. Just very simple, but it needs to be cross-brands. And that really needs collaboration. It needs collaboration with different industries as well. Like suddenly the fashion industry needs to somehow work with the waste handling industry, which they never worked with before. And with Brussels, because this is policies and regulations, if we just take waste handling itself. And then we're just talking about the sorting, because if we sort it, then we can recycle it. But we can't recycle anything unless we sort it. So
I never thought of it like that, because the waste handling industry already has the solution, because they do it as part of their, I guess, job in a way. So maybe they can help with us with clothes and garments. Because I think somebody mentioned to me that in the Netherlands, you put your garments in just one big box. There's no separation. There's no nothing. So what does that mean? Does that mean it goes to a landfill because nobody's going to sort it out?
and most of the time, yes.
Yeah.
And burnt. I mean, that's what happens. But we need to, I mean, there is industrial sorting, and that could help to some extent, but we need consumer sorting. You need to be able to go up to a machine, and it opens the right box, and you sort it, depending on if it's 20% polyester, 80% cotton, for example. It needs
This is where the open connector can come into play, because if you can scan it and understand what your garment's made out of, and then you can sort it correctly, no?
You need this data problem come in, and that's where we are a switchboard, because you need suddenly Brussels to understand the problem and the fashion industry to understand what they need to integrate, etc.
Can you elaborate a little bit for our audience? I know I mentioned earlier that you're also working with the UN. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that you're doing with them, and also maybe share a little bit about COP28 that's coming up as well, and the role that the Fashion Innovation Center is playing there?
With the UN? Yeah, we're setting up, I mean, you're also part of that, and we're setting up a task force. And it actually comes from COP27 in Egypt, where it was the first time actually that fashion was on stage. And we managed to bring Fila up on stage. We dragged them up screaming, but we managed to get them up on stage. And we actually talked about the problem of overproduction and fashion in general. And it was more about getting it on the agenda, that if we're going to talk about environment, I mean, think about it. It was COP27. It was the 27th COP, and that was the first time fashion was on stage. One of the biggest polluters in the world. That was the first time they were on stage. So it's a little bit weird. But after that, I think that UN realized that, oh, yeah, we really need to take care of fashion. So now we're starting a task force within UN, and especially for the COP28, where it will be bigger. We'll probably have more brand than just Fila on stage as well, talking about the problem. But it's a way to address and start pointing at the problem and create a roadmap. Well, the goal and vision of UN is to have a roadmap for how the fashion industry can transition into becoming more sustainable.
Can you guys believe that COP27 was the first time that the fashion industry was invited to the table? I feel like, I think like we've been undercover. They've been like, let's leave these fluffy people to their business, and they're not really paying attention to the fashion industry until they really realize what it is that the fashion industry is doing in terms of damage.
But it is an industry that's been under the radar for a very long time. I think, and this is my very personal opinion, I think it's a gender problem actually, because a lot of, especially people in Brussels, have regarded fashion as something that their women wears, a lot of white men, and it's not regarded as an industry, and hence they haven't produced any regulations. So they've been roaming free because, fashion is not, automotive, mining, like real industry, and you haven't regarded that fashion as an industry for a very long time. That was actually 2 years ago, was the first time EU recognized fashion as a legit industry, 2 years ago.
And it makes a lot of money. It's one of the biggest employers globally, right?
Yeah, it's huge. In Sweden, for example, we're very proud of the wood. And we're talking about the wood industry and the wood export. The fashion industry actually exports more than the wood industry in Sweden. With the help of H&M, of course. But still, they're bigger than the wood industry. And nobody knows about it.
I think that's also been detrimental to the industry, because I think if we had been, told off for our bad behavior earlier, maybe a lot of things have been put in place. But we're only really starting now, in the last 10 years maybe, and then policy in the last couple of years. And now they're saying, oh, you got till 2030, guys, which is 7 years away, to make a change on an industry that's been running, like you said, this way for such a long time, and then we're given X amount of years to make that turnaround. It literally, we're moving a Titanic here, and there's like icebergs everywhere, and we're not trying not to hit them. So I kind of see the other side of the fashion industry a little bit like, okay, I understand they've got a lot of pressure on them, they've got to make this change, it's going to be really hard for them, but then again, they need to do it.
Yeah, I do understand the problem for the industry. They've been, like I said, no one really pushed them, and they haven't been regarded as an industry, so they could run around completely freely and do whatever they did. And sometimes it feels like when you step into the fashion bubble, they still live in a world where you drink martinis, smoke on the planes, and like, whoa. And when they start looking at the reality, they're completely shocked. Like, what? You can't smoke on the plane? Well, the martini at the pool, it's 12 o'clock. No, it's not accepted anymore. It really feels like you're back in the 60s or something in the fashion industry in general. So
I think more we're going to not so much change fashion. I think we're looking to change the industry and how it runs. I think fashion will always remain the same, because it's a form of identity, self-expression. That will always remain. I think a lot of people fear that when we think of changing fashion, we're going to change what fashion means to people, when actually we're just going to change how the industry runs, right? And so I want to open the floor to questions before I continue, because I can talk to this man forever. So anyone got any questions for Fredrik at all with regards to the industry, with regards to new revenue streams, policy? And he's got like a lot of knowledge in all these different things. Anyone has any thoughts at all, any questions or statements they would like to share? Are we going to be
too few people? It's
we
very
got
scary.
We got a quiet bunch today. Hey. Yes, please.
Thank you.
I'm going to come to you. I'm going to try not to fall off the stage. Got this fear of falling off the stage. Okay.
You have to hear your own voice. That's so weird. The subscription idea is super interesting, but for that to happen, I think the price point has to be high enough for a product so that the return would make sense. So if clothes are so cheap and you rent them out, or you have a subscription-based idea, then the cost of transporting these items is actually more expensive than the product itself. So I think once the EU regulations come in, what do you think about that?
We did our homework actually quite a lot, especially when it comes to subscriptions. Because it's very interesting. Like, how can you make money out of subscription, and can you make money out of subscription? And we actually contacted a couple of companies, and I talked about it in the workshop yesterday. Spotify was one of them, where we asked them, like, you are really good at this. Calculate. Does this make sense for you to make a subscription service, for example? Would you make money? And it does, and especially for a little bit bigger company, because the first pool of clothes, the first year, so to speak, yeah, that's an investment. That's a cost. But then already year 2 and year 3 and year 4, then you got an exponential, like really, the hockey stick effect that all investors like. You get this very exponential increase in revenue. Since you have, you have this time where you have the cost of the clothes to produce it, and as soon as it's covered, it starts to generate money, and it constantly generates money. So year 2, when you add more clothes to your pool, you still have old clothes from year 1, and that's when you start to see this like really propelling effect in revenue.
I mean, just to add to what Fredrik said, I don't know if this answers your question.
Does it make sense? Yeah.
If it answers your question, are you talking about if H&M starts a subscription model with their really badly made, only wear one time T-shirts and clothes, how can they be part of it? Because their clothes are not really made for rental.
No, but you can't. That's a good thing about the rental, is that in the business model itself, you want to produce a little bit better clothes with better quality because you make more money. The longer the clothes last, the more money you make. And we talked about that yesterday as well, that people think that the clothes last for a season. But I had this little experiment I was doing for years at every fashion dinner I am at, which is too many, where I ask people how old the clothes are. And it's often between 20 to last yesterday. But most of the time, it's about 4, 5, 6 years old, most of the clothes that people are wearing. Just think about today, the clothes that you are wearing. When did you buy it? So clothes last much longer than we think, from a trend or look perspective. And you can play around with them. So, because that's often one of the things that people say, but you need new clothes. Yeah, but you can throw in one pieces, you can throw in a lot of fun clothes and be very creative in a pool of clothes. But the clothes last much longer than we think. From just a look perspective, which means that it makes sense to invest a little bit more in the quality of the clothes because you make more money out of it.
I personally think when it comes to subscription models, correct me if I'm wrong, Fredrik, that we need to get the consumer used to the idea of subscribing to clothes. And maybe we can start off them subscribing to digital clothes. Let's say if you want to dress yourself on Instagram using filters, they subscribe X amount of money a month they pay, and they're able to change their look online. And then it can progress into something where you actually get the physical. Do you think this is a much more easier route and a more successful route in order to getting people used to that type of, way of shopping? Because it's very different. And we all have our mind wired a certain way right now, and we have to unwire how we shop, and it takes time.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, actually, that is a way. But I think that it's a very generational thing, I've noticed. Because when you tell this to someone 23 and younger, they're like, why doesn't this exist? They're not interested in ownership. They're like, I just want stuff. I want them now, and now I don't want it. So I think it's a very generational thing.
So you should be more of a sharing community. So I think when we were talking about the cost.
Want stuff. I want the look. I want to look like that. And I want all of that now. That's generation today. Like, I want it now. So subscription services works much better, especially for a younger audience, because it fits closer to a digital world that we live in. I want to watch this YouTube video now. I want this game now. I want that look. Not I want to go and buy a piece of shoes and then wait till next month and buy trousers. I want that whole look now.
See, I'm from that generation where we used to save up for our dresses, you know. You work your little weekend job and, you save up and then you buy it and then you look after it like it's your baby because, I think that we need to go back to that way of like respecting what we buy. And when you kind of save up for something for so long, the way you look after it is even more than you would if I was able to buy, I don't know, something from Primark.
No, but I agree. But I think that, I can respect, it's quite smart as well. Maybe we, older generation, need to rethink, because I think there is something in this, why should you own it? It takes up space. Look at the rental prices or prices for apartments in cities. You're using maybe 5-6 square meters of it for clothes. I mean, and back in the days, we actually used a couple of square meters for CD records. You remember that? Do you miss it?
No, I do not.
Going out and buying CD records that you buy yourself, own your own music.
I used to carry like a massive, I used to zip it like this.
You don't want to own
open it
your
up
own
and all my
music.
CDs are in there.
Saving up for a record.
Oh, no, I don't miss all that. How many of you are for the sharing, kind of like a sharing economy? He's just like saying yes. The lady in the back, can you let us know why? Why would you want to be part of the sharing economy? The lady there, yeah, with her hand up, yes.
Yeah, I think the whole sort of concept of ownership's a bit dead, because I think everybody's now so. I think the thing about the clothing industry is that everybody's. The reaction I've heard before is that, oh my God, I wouldn't want to wear anybody else's clothes. But it's very divided and very extreme. So most of my clothes are vintage, you know, kind of recycled, even though I'm in the fashion industry. And it's a very polarised view that I come across. So a lot of people are like, yeah, why would I own it? Whereas lots of other people are like, oh no, I couldn't possibly wear something somebody else has worn. But I think that's for us to overcome in terms of laundering and recycling. So it's very doable.
It's quite interesting to hear, you know, someone actually kind of champion the idea of wearing, like you said, you shop at Vinted, right? Because whenever I think of Vinted, I always think of like my younger cousins really going for Vinted. I'm sure you mean
55.
this lady are the same age, and you know, and the idea that you are actually leading that, I kind of really like that. I think it's always focused towards more younger people to be shopping in Vinted.
Yeah, but yes, I think it's about the integration. That's the problem. If you look at, like I said, if you make the comparison with the music industry, what Spotify did, for example, was that they integrated it correctly. That was the way people wanted to consume the music. And that's when it took off. They just did it correctly. They used the right words. They did it correctly. There was a lot of tries before that. Remember, you could buy song by song. There were different stores and everything. Everybody tried to like find a way for how digital music would go forward. Spotify didn't came out of nothing, which is often the myth. But they did it correctly. And I think that that's what we're waiting for when it comes to fashion. It's like, because it's small things. I usually take the example of Tinder, for example. Tinder existed for a long time as a company and very few users. And then they added one UI thing, and it was a swipe button. And it just went up. It was just a UI change. So I think it's very small things that needed, like how do you scroll? Is it a curated looks that you get from the service? Who do you work with? Is it fun to do it? I think it's really down to that right now, because I think that as a business concept and how it works, that's not the problem. But you need to integrate it in that Spotify, like, yeah, this is how we want it. And I think it will be several players, not one player, like in the music industry. I
think when you say this, I feel like asking the fashion industry, are you going to be Blockbusters or are you going to be Netflix? You know, Blockbusters, those who remember Blockbusters, you know, they were the biggest kind of, I mean, every Saturday my mum and dad used to take me to Blockbusters to get that VHS, that movie, you know, and then unfortunately, I think they thought that their business idea will continue. And then Netflix, I think they kind of sent our CDs via the post. Remember that little small segment of like going into a shop, now actually we can send you your CD? And that lasted a little while, and then they went into streaming services. And Blockbusters just, I don't know what happened.
And then they went into a content provider. I think that Netflix is a really good, I mean, if you're thinking about from a brand perspective today, what they need to do is as extreme journey as Netflix, because Netflix from the beginning was a logistic company. Like you said, they were just sending out DVDs. So they went from being a logistic company into a streaming company into a content provider and a studio, which is a quite remarkable journey if you think about it. Like it's completely different companies in reality.
And I think they're a good example as well, because if you think about it, when Netflix started, they used to be working with Disney and all these other companies. And when Disney decided, actually, no Netflix, we're going to start our own streaming service, Netflix had already put into place the idea of making their own movies. so they actually don't have to rely on others. I think it's a really good example of how the industry needs to continue to evolve, right? Don't stop. Keep moving. Any other questions? Guys, I'm just looking at the time, make sure we don't go over. Any other statements, conversations, questions? Yes?
So the youngsters that are growing up right now, they probably won't be able to buy a house or an apartment because they can't afford it. So ownership for them is already not having anything is already like a baseline. So I think the rental thing's probably something that they're really used to. So even for me, my generation, 30s, early 30s, it's quite hard to find an apartment in big cities, London or Berlin or Paris. So yeah, I think renting for them comes quite naturally. Yeah.
I agree with that, because you're a renter, aren't you, Fredrik? Fredrik, okay, I have a car because I live in a village in the middle of nowhere, but you actually rent your car service. So you don't actually own anything, but you are able to access a car.
I'm Swedish, so I have Volvo on demand.
You know, can you imagine Volvo on demand? Can you now imagine, I don't know, let me think of a respectable brand. It's really hard to think of one. So I'm just going to throw it out there, Zara on demand. How many of you would sign up to Zara on demand if it was taking away the sustainable angle of it?
That's actually where the fast fashion industry will struggle, because they haven't built up any reason to why you would want it once it's going into rental. I mean, but if you have a cool brand and have a legacy, you actually benefit more from it.
See, I would subscribe to Zara on demand in terms of their classics. So when I'm working, I like the idea when, like, for example, I come to Munich and I rent my wardrobe for Munich, but then I give it back when I'm done and I go back to my Cinderella rags. You know, I don't actually own my clothes. When I travel for work, I like the idea of actually renting my work clothes, you know, and then go back to the jean and T-shirt when I'm at home. So therefore, I don't actually own anything, and I'm okay with that. I mean, how many of you would do that? If you could travel and rent your business clothes and then just give them back, right?
And then all the fashion nerds can, of course, buy their pieces that they have at home, and they're like, oh, I have this Molly Blahnik shoes with that seam. And
Yeah, to see, if you have your Manolas, you're not going to ruin those.
it's like the
soon.
music industry where people are still buying vinyl. I mean, of course, but that's not bad for them. It's on a level where it's acceptable.
I don't think we're going to have no clothes. I think we'll always have a little something, but our everyday clothes can be rental. Sorry, you wanted to ask a question.
Maybe we could think of all together this word rental. It's not too sexy or too cool. Some other word for this, because vintage, we don't think about it as rental, but you don't think that someone else owned it before. You think vintage is cool. But maybe two of you have any ideas?
I mean, I think what they are using, one of the companies is saying pre-loved, and I think that's quite nice, actually. But, yeah.
Any marketing and PR people in the audience who can spin that word and make it sound a little sexier? I think that's a really good point. Because if I hear rental, I'm thinking my car, I'm thinking...
A rental.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we're going to be renting our lingerie and underwear, but I think the idea of rental clothes, it needs to be marketed really well, and people need to really think about, okay, how can I make this sound attractive? How can I sell this to the customer so they think they're getting something really new and exciting when actually we're just dressing it up nicer?
And it's also about access. I think we should talk more about the access, because you suddenly get access. Instead of having like 5 pieces in your wardrobe, you might have 30,000 pieces in your wardrobe, right? So you get access to it. Your wardrobe is much bigger.
Imagine having an app on your phone and your wardrobe actually exists on your phone. So everything that you rent, you can just be like Clueless 2.0, you know, just kind of swiping through your wardrobe.
But you know how people swipe and look for the vintage sites and, you know, good hunt? You can do the same thing with a rental service. It's like, oh, that one, and I want that.
I like that. And then being saying to your friends, you want to borrow something from my wardrobe? Here you go. And they can just look through your phone.
Yeah.
Actually, I hope I'm alive to see that, because I think I quite like that idea, actually. How many of you would have an app with your digital wardrobe? Not digital, really, is it? But your rented pieces on your phone? See, the numbers are going up.
I wouldn't.
I like this. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please.
I wanted to make a comment what you said about the different, like to have this on your phone. This will cut out all people that don't have the perfect sizes. We shouldn't forget that it's still in the industry a problem if you don't fit in the classical sizes to find a wardrobe on the market or also in an exchange situation. And I think it might not be a solution for everyone.
No, because do you know what it will be? Because there's so many sizing technology solutions out there that the fashion industry is way too lazy to adopt. That are
Like
making
what?
There's many sizing solutions.
Like
I'm sure
what?
you're aware of a few, right? Top of my head, I can't really name
No,
one, but there's.
What I'm thinking about is that with a rental solution or subscription, you can put a little bit more money into each piece, like we talked about before, because it makes sense. And there are a couple of fabrics, for example, I'm working with a company that works with a fabric that is stretchable. So you can actually
There are a lot of
adjust the
stretchable,
actual
yeah, but it
size of the-
doesn't, won't adjust a 10 to a 21.
Yes, you could actually.
No.
You could go from extra small to extra large.
No.
I'm working with them and I've seen it. So, yeah.
So they will. When you think about rental bridal dresses, they are designed to fit more than 1 or 2 sizes, some of them. So I think still it's about designing, so it will fit more.
But I agree. I mean, there will be cases where it doesn't fit, definitely. But I mean, it depends also about the reason. I think if the rental service aim is to get rid of most of the clothes because we overproduce, then
I agree, yeah.
it might not be a problem that for those that it doesn't fit, they buy the clothes.
I would like to suggest another cis person. So that would be a nice extra added value for as work for
I mean, the repair industry is growing quite quick at the moment. You know, they're really kind of pushing for the idea of instead of throwing away something, let's get it repaired, or you can get it changed, or you can get it different color, like different ways. So same outfit but different, right? But I really think the sizing technologies. I'm still a fan of the technology and the idea that because I mean I am no size 10, but I like the idea that if I'm able to put my what my sizing is into a system, it's able to maybe show me clothes that will most likely match my body.
Sure.
So there's I mean, Zalando 2 days ago launched this initiative on their site where it's all about helping shoppers be able to create or have garments that are within their size. Because sizing is not really regulated. I mean, I can be a 12 in one dress, a 14 in another, a 16 in another. So, you know, it just really depends on the brand. So I'm a massive fan of sizing solutions, and I really think we need to invest more money in them so people don't feel like, oh, I can't wear that. No, you can. I can wear it if you put it in the right size for me. You know, if we can personalize everything else in our life, why not personalize the clothes that we wear? So keep an eye out for that technology because I'm convinced it's gonna help the industry. Anyone else got any questions? I'm keeping 5 more minutes, guys. Any last words, Fredrik, that you'd like to share with our wonderful audience? I think it's been quite interactive, which I love. It's being able to kind of have that conversation with them. So have you got any lasting words that you would like to end our talk on?
Yeah, I mean, my last word would be that actually this, like I talked about 30 to 40% overproduction. I talked about how bad the industry is, but also seeing in the pre-studies and everything that we've been doing and all of what we're doing right now, there are solutions for it, and it's real solutions. It's very doable, so which gives at least me hope. So there is hope. There is not like, oh, we are effed. There is no future. It really is a future, and you can really become more. You can really combat at least the first kind of, 30 to 40%, 3 to 4% of the CO2 emission global, that you can combat relatively simple compared to all other industries.
So he used the word hope. My last question to everyone in the audience, how many of you have hope that the fashion industry will come through at the other end in the coming years? Wow, okay. 2, 3, 4. My God, we're done. I've got to find another job, I think, another industry to work in. The fashion industry has no hope. Okay, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you, Fredrik.
Thank you.